Hello everyone, my name is Attila Tokai. I will be the host today. Today's meetup organized by an independent Hungarian Azure user group where you can hear exciting news about Azure and related technologies. This event is a place where we have talks, discussions, we will share our knowledge and experiences. So feel free to ask questions during the whole event and during the Q&A session also. Before we start, I would like to remind you about these events is a regular events. So if you join to our Azure user group community, you will notified and there will be a lot of similar events about Azure. So what we have today. Today, the topic will be the ChatGPT and the GitHub Copilot. Please welcome our speaker, Krisztián Hefinger from Deutsche Telekom PSE Hungary. Krisztián, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. And welcome everyone in this session where we're going to talk about how ChatGPT and how GitHub Copilot can help you in your daily work. My name is Krisztián Hefinger and I'm a cloud solution architect at Deutsche Telekom IT Solutions. I'm an Azure architect since 2014 and actively working in AI at 2020. What we're going to talk about today is that we're going to explore some of the opportunities how large language models can help you in your daily corporate life. And we will do it in a very pragmatic way. So 2 feet on the ground, we will do it on very high-plus way. I will show some demos about it. I will talk about some theories, but it will be more practice-oriented. So I'm not gonna start with explaining what are large language models, how they are working, because we don't have time for that, to be honest. So if you're interested in that topic, maybe we can have another meetup where we are explaining in more detail. But right now we are just looking to approach this in a pragmatic way, how we can apply large language models in our daily life. A very little brief history, and this is really just to put into context that why everyone is so hyped about large language models is that this technology started from 1966 with ELIZA. That was a very early model that was basically, in modern terms, it was a rule-based chatbot, essentially what we are talking about. So at the very beginning, researchers started to try to approach this problem on a rule-based effort. They wanted to define the language as a mathematical problem, and they wanted to set up rules and then generate text like that. Obviously, that was not really working. So at 1980s, 1990s, they go into the statistics way to resolve this problem. And in 2000s, they go with the neural network way, with the neural probabilistic large language models, so not large, but simple language models. That is a big paradigm change because basically they just went from rule-based into another approach where they did not try to define the rules, how the language works. They just approach this in a brute force way, so they just pull a lot of text and let the neural network figure out that how the language works in the behind the scenes. And the old technologies really bloomed from 2017 when the transformer models came out. And after that, well, a new solution popping out every day, basically. Every week, a new large language model came out now. I have to update these slides a few times since I started to draft them because basically new and new language models came out. Just think on Llama version 2, which came out like 2 weeks before. Not last week, this week, the Free Willy model also came out. So there's a lot of open source and commercial models are coming out every day. And yeah, as you can see in the graph, they are becoming larger and larger and larger. So while 2018, we were talking about 94 million parameters models as a large language model. Nowadays, we talk about more than 100 billion parameters models. And GPT-4, we don't even know that how many parameters we have in that. We assume that is 1.76 trillion parameters, but we don't know for sure because that information is not public anymore. So there's a growing trend in the case of the size of these large language models. We don't know yet that how long it will be sustainable, but we will see. Okay, so how we can use these large language models? We basically have two, I interpret this as two main topics. One of them is content generation and the other one is content interpretation. For content generation, this is typically the way to take over the boring task, like creating the boring section of the documentations, like what is the purpose of the document, what are the stakeholder roles, some generic procedures or descriptions can be generated with that. That's what the content generation is all about. So it really excels in that field to create corporate boring documentations and stuff like that. It can also help you to provide documentation templates. For example, if you don't know how to create a high-level design, or if you don't know how to create a change documentation, then it can help you to generate a template and customize it for you. It can also help in the code writing. So basically, it can speed up how you can write the code by suggestions, and it can also help you to translate the code from one programming language to another. Just like with the machine translation, where spoken languages can be translated from one to another. You can have conversations with these large language models, and it really helps with, for example, debugging an issue, or if you just want to brainstorm something, you can follow the ID3 approach of drawing up a situation and then ask the model to act as different stakeholders, ask their questions, and from those feedbacks, you can generate something new. The other area is text summarization. Of course, it's not just generating text, but it can interpret text and highlight basically insights about the documentation. So it can give you an executive summary, for example, from a documentation, or it can understand the sentiment. What this text is about, what is the tone, how does it feel? Let's say a newer use case, what in a corporate environment we use large language models, is to expand the capabilities of the existing search engines. So not just thinking about the internet search engine, like the integration with Bing, but also to search the internal documentation. For example, you can, if you have a large knowledge base, which are usually unstructured, you can adjust it with a large language model, and then you will have meaningful searches and meaningful results from that. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit ChatGPT, and we go from the basics very fast to the use cases. So as you might know, ChatGPT is available from OpenAI. You can try it out for free from their portal. And of course, it's also available through APIs from OpenAI and also from Azure. The difference is that if you're using it from OpenAI's portal, then basically you are acknowledging that, so you are approving that all of these conversations that you are doing that can be used to train the model further. So they are collecting that data and it will be used to train the model further. If you are using it from API, then basically this is not relevant anymore. So they are not using your conversations. So you can integrate this solution in a more secure way into your applications. A very important thing that these models are constantly developed. So if you are talking about ChatGPT 3.5, that's not like that they created a version and now you are consuming it. They are constantly keeping up to date by adding new features, new functionalities, or just adjusting specific fields, specific answers for that. So if you don't get used to that, for example, the large language models cannot do mathematical equations, because if the community provides enough feedback or there's enough hype about that, then large language models will learn that. So they will bypass this limitation, as I will show it to you later on the demo. Now, as of writing, and maybe this section will age pretty badly, but as of writing, 3.5 Turbo is commonly available, and the version 4 is still hard to get, so there's a limitation if you are having an OpenAI Plus subscription. If you are consuming from Azure, you have a wait list, and you need to make monetary commitments to get GPT-4, because everyone wants to get it, and the resource consumption of the model is pretty high, so they need to prioritize. Okay, so ChatGPT is used in a conversational format, obviously, hence the name. And you can use plugins to extend the model's knowledge. So for example, you can use plugins to search the internet for your solution, and the results can be interpreted through ChatGPT. That's a good way to extend the model's knowledge, but it's also risky because some of these plugins in the past used to steal your API key, and some of these plugins are removed already. And also they can cause a huge consumption. If you're an API user, then basically you are paid for the consumption. And if you are not careful enough, then basically these plugins can generate a very huge consumption for you. We have open source alternatives like Llama or Llama version 2, which came out recently, or any new language models based on Llama, like Open Assistant or GPT for All or FreeGPT. And there are other alternatives like Dolly from Databricks or Google Bard or FreeBilly from Stability AI. So let's take a look on some of the limitations, because you need to understand that these limitations are existing. And if you got a result from ChatGPT, then which is not really yields the result that you want, then probably because of these. So first of all, it's bad at reasoning. That's because the model itself does not comprehend the subject. So it just generates the responses based on probabilistic patterns. So the model can tell a definition. It can tell the definition in different versions. So it can tell it in a complicated way. It can tell it like you are a 6-year-old, so you can understand it. But it doesn't mean that the model can apply the definition in practice. Or even if the model can apply, let's say, it cannot say that, cannot explain that why it is doing it like that. So reasoning is a very complicated thing actually, and it's in conjunction with the other limitation that the model has no common sense at all. Well, just like most of us humans, it just doesn't have it. Recently, there was a big drama about the mathematical capabilities of the large language models, especially for ChatGPT. So it even failed on the most simple task, like checking if a number is prime or composite. Now I strike that out because it's not applicable anymore. So since 2 weeks, yet again, this is a part in the presentation with age pretty bad. So 2 weeks before, it failed to check if a number is prime or composite. However, it knows the definition. It could provide the definition, what is a prime number. It can even provide the code in Python or whatever to check if the number is prime or composite. But if you ask the simple question, is number 9 is a prime? It failed to answer properly. Usually it guessed everything as prime, or completely the opposite. It guessed all the numbers as composite. Now, since this community uproar, they fixed the problem. So they implemented a feature somewhere in the model or somewhere in the chain of the models that is now able to do these kind of common mathematical equations. The same applied for hallucinations. Sometimes, as again, the model is generating responses based on probabilistic patterns. Sometimes the model generates an information or a data which is not true. So it's just making up data basically, or making up information, making up text. And the problem with that whatever is happening, that the model is providing this information with high confidence. So it's not like in a questionable way or with low confidence. It's not highlighting for the users that this information might not be true. That was the problem. That is a common issue with the hallucinations within the large language models. I see in the past weeks, a lot of change happened to eliminate hallucinations as well. So I will show with one of the demo cases. One of the demo cases that I used before to present how hallucinations work, some of them are not working anymore. So they really constantly working on updating the models and eliminating all of these issues. All right. So when we're interacting with the large language models, we need to create prompts, and creating prompts called as prompt engineering. So this is a super hot skill. You can see it everywhere. Some people talk about it like an esoteric super hot knowledge. But basically, if we go down this way, let's take a look on what prompt engineering is for real. So prompt engineering is about defining a context, because you're interacting with a generic model. That's the G in the GPT. It's a generic model. you need to define the context, that what is this discussion is about. You can also define a role for the model. So you can say that, okay, you are a Python developer, or you can say that you are a tech writer, or you can say you are a marketing assistant, or whatever. You can also define your problem. Well, yeah, this is why we are here. So you can ask your question or the task what you want the model to carry about. And you can define the desired outcome. Do you want to have a document draft? You want to have a code, tabular data, a table of contents, or whatever else. And as an extra, you can provide additional guidelines, like you can define the tone, you can define that who will be the audience of your documentation or your task, or which terms you want the model to avoid. Now, if we look these 5 sections, basically, you don't need to use all of them together. So you can use, for example, just defining the context and the problem. Or if you feel lucky, you are just defining your problem, let the model handle it. But the more information you give to the model, the better results you will have. And if we look at these 5 sections, well, basically prompt engineering is really about basic communication. So it's nothing more. It's not an esoteric knowledge. It's not something you need to born to understand. It will definitely not replace programming knowledge. This is very straightforward, basic communication. If you are talking to a human, if you are talking to your coworker, basically you need to do the same thing. So you explain your problem, you explain the context, you explain what are your expectations. And this is what you need to do as well if you talk to a large language model. Now, you can find a lot of content, a lot of, let's say, training materials where they urge you to use magic words, like you need to use the superhuman Python coding god instead of just saying that you are a Python developer. Personally, I believe that this is absolutely rubbish. So there's no difference between using either of that. You are just defining the context. Maybe in the tone you will have different results, but honestly, I don't believe in that. If you are a believer, you can use magic words, you can try it out, make a comparison, whatever works for you. So where you can learn to properly prompt, I urge you to check ChatGPT cheat sheets, for example, because you can have a lot of examples there for prompts, and you can set up your own prompts by copying those or authoring those. You can also join OpenAI Discord. Well, take it with a grain of salt, because recently there's a lot of magic word believer joined, and they are giving you complex prompts, which usually have no better results than simple prompts. Where you should not try to learn, well, TikTok, social media, where self-proclaimed marketing gods are sharing the knowledge with you, usually you can see that, okay, this is bullshit. Let's take a look at some demos. This is a typical conversation just to show the memory of the ChatGPT. If you talk to a model, let's say I asked that what is my favorite color. Now, obviously, as an AI model, it will not have this information about you. So I'm explaining that, okay, my favorite color is blue with a touch of greenish red. Give me a polite answer. And then if I ask again that what is my favorite color, now it can tell that based on my information, my favorite color is just what I explained. What we see here is that a conversation based on responses and questions. So now if I ask again that what is my favorite color, it will know that, but how it will know? It is not sharing, it is not saving any information about me. So whatever it knows about me, it comes from this session. When I ask a new question, what is happening that the front end is sending all of these questions and the responses together to an API. And then the API provides an answer based all of these previous questions and all of the previous answers that the model is given before. So if I have a new chat window and I asking the favorite question again, I'm still logged in with my account, but it will say again that it has absolutely no ID. So what we're seeing here is that basically when you ask a new question, when you have a new response basically in the same communication thread, that what is happening in the background, that all of these messages are being sent to the API, and the API is giving back the answer processing all of these messages one by one. So if you want to change subject, for example, you can use that command that a lot of people is using, that forget everything what I said before, and then there's a new topic. But is the problem with that if you start this new topic by this, you still send all of the questions time and time again to the API. That means if you are on an API consumption plan and you are paying per tokens, then basically you are just generating consumption for you without any meaning. In the most meaningless way, I would say. So if you want to have a new session, then basically just create a new chat and do that. This is my example for the hallucination. So about 3 weeks before, if I asked for an explanation for the Hefinger theorem, I got an explanation created from a mock-up of a few physics theorem, which obviously is not existing at all. So right now, if you do the same, if you just make up a theorem or make up any definition that is not existing in the real world, ChatGPT will respond to you that this is not existing, or it doesn't know about it. And if you try to trick it like, okay, it's a physics theorem, it still will refuse to answer because this is not documented, so the model does not know about it. This is an improvement about the hallucinations, what I mentioned before. So I hope that we can expect even further improvements that filter out other type of hallucinations. Mathematics, yet again, the prime number example, you can find in some of the performance measuring issues with that the model wasn't able to define if a number is prime or if it's composite. Now that's a huge change is implemented, and wow, it is able to define if the number is prime or composite. So this is another example when the model was not able to comprehend something and they worked on it, and now it is able. So you can expect a lot of changes like that in the future as well. Okay, so I'm gonna share you some user stories. So what we can do with ChatGPT to make our corporate life easier. Now it's some meaningful demo time. So my main concern as an architect, sometimes you need to write technical documentation, and not everyone loves to write technical documentation because it's usually boring or uninspired or just really robotic work. And of course, if you write a lot of documentation, then you will have the templates, but if not, then you need to find a template or you need to make up your own template. But this is something where ChatGPT can help you, or any other large language model can help you to speed this up. Like in this case, I defined the role for the model as a tech writer. And the context is Azure and cloud computing. And my ask is that I need to have a table of contents of a high-level design document for migrating on-premise VMs into the cloud. And what I get as a result is basically a table of contents for real, which is, let's say that it's okay-ish. So it's quite accurate that what are the activities that we need to do when we are doing a migration. Now, this is called chaining, when in the next response, I'm asking the model to detail the section 1.1 in 10 sentences. That's basically the purpose of the document in this table of content. And the model is generated me a very useful purpose of the document section, what I could paste into the document or let's say rewrite it. But you need to be aware that this is not really usage ready version. So you still need to review it. You still need to maybe add your thoughts or eliminate some of the sentences. But basically, that's a very good template to use in the future. Now, if we proceed further, let's say the next question, I'm asking if you can provide example for the stakeholder roles for section 1.3. We are having a kind of good description about what kind of key stakeholder roles can be applicable in a project like this. You can adjust it with your own versions, you can add it, but basically as a template, that's pretty fine. You can also ask more complicated questions, like, for example, for application readiness assessment. Let's say that we want to have some guidelines on how to decide to replatform or refactor an application during the cloud migration. And then it is providing some thoughts that you can also use to use it in your documentation. So basically, it can generate you templates, documentation templates for tech writing, and this is speeding up the work a lot and actually giving some inspiration if you just don't want to start it at all. The next use case where you can use GPT is translation between programming languages. So let's say you have a PowerShell code and you want to translate it into Python. So that's a pretty easy prompt. I'm just asking if it can, and it can. So I post my code. It is coming from the internet, basically just a copy of an Azure managed disk from one subscription to another, nothing complex or fancy here. And it is giving me the version in Python, which is quite proper, and also giving guidelines that I need to authenticate. I need to replace basically some of the variables with my own real data and so on and so forth. So it's not just giving a code, which is fine. It is also giving some instructions on how to use that code. But still, whenever you are translating one programming language to another, or you are writing a code with GPT, you need to be aware that you might not have a properly working code. So every time you need to test it, you need to review it. You cannot just drop into the production and hope that everything will work fine. You need to go through the same stages like you're writing your own code. Another option you can do is debug. So I got the script from the previous step, and I deliberately made some mistakes, removed the comments, renamed some variables. So I messed up for real this whole script, and I asked GPT to debug my script. And basically it was able to find the problem that I didn't even write down the error message. So I just pasted in the script and said that it doesn't working at all. And GPT was able to crop out that this new azdisk commandlet should not work because I used the wrong variable to pass some parameters. The variable was existing, but it was containing a different information, not the one that it was required. So basically it is fixing my code and also giving recommendations that how should I use it, I should replace the values and so on and so forth. All right, another topic with programming is regex. So I never meet with anyone who like to write regex, regular expressions, but sometimes you need to use regular expressions in the text. And GPT can help you to write regular expressions based on your queries. And not just able to write it, for example, but it also can be used backwards. So if you have a regular expression like this, a very friendly one, then it can tell that, okay, what it does. So this super regular expression is extracting email addresses from a text based on the RFC standard. And I just created with another tool a regular expression, and it was also able to tell me exactly that what it does in a step-by-step basis. Also giving me some examples to see that what kind of strings will be cached and what kind of strings will not be cached by that. Okay, another interesting thing is that agile user stories. So sometimes you just need to create the user stories for yourself. And what you can use GPT basically is to create a user story for you by giving the minimum information and then filling up the gaps. This is also the chaining, so the response chaining. First, I'm just defining the role of the model, not the role of the context, that I need to write an agile user story with subtask about changing a YAML deployment pipeline. And I'm asking the model that what is the information that you need in order to create this. And it is giving back some of the information that I can give, like for example, user role, goal, reason, scope, acceptance criteria. And for the sake of the demo, I just add some of the information here without detailing too much. And at the end of the day, it was able to create a fine user story with some example subtask. And well, I asked to remove some of the subtask and remove the knowledge shading part because I don't believe that it should be in the scope. So it's updated again by removing the unnecessary subtask. And at the end of the story, that's what I found the most interesting part. I asked for a CSV output of this user story so I can import it into Azure DevOps. And basically it's giving me. So by exporting this and replacing some of the placeholder text, I can take this user story and import it into Azure DevOps immediately. So that's quite powerful and really speeding up the work. So another use case what you can use ChatGPT for is basically to help with Excel. So it can help you to create help you to create Excel formulas, or can help you to basically translate Excel formulas into some comprehensive description that what this formula is actually doing. It can be very helpful if you need to work with an Excel sheet that is created by someone else and you don't really have an idea what the actual formula is doing or why it is doing that. Then you can paste that formula into ChatGPT and it will give you the result, basically, that what the formula is actually doing. And if you're asking, again, ChatGPT to change something in this formula, like, for example, add an additional filtering or add additional something else, then it can update this formula for you on the fly. The same applies for pandas. You can give a use case like this for ChatGPT, saying that, okay, you have a data frame like this, and you want to create a new column based on some conditions. And then it can give you the actual code that what you need to do in order to make this happen. And this recommendation is actually quite good. So, however, this was not a complicated use case, but still, it is a good recommendation what we got. The very same applies for SQL. So you can paste a SQL query into ChatGPT and ask that what this query is actually doing, and it can explain in a very detailed form that what the query is doing. And it can do backwards as well. So if you just add basically a kind of table structure and you are asking by plain English that, okay, I want you to create a query from this table structure based on this and that, adding inner joins whatsoever, then it can give you a SQL statement what you can use. So these was the main topics what I wanted to talk about ChatGPT. And if I go back to the demo, the next thing what I'm gonna talk about is about GitHub Copilot. So GitHub Copilot is essentially a GPT model trained on public GitHub code. As someone said, these generative programming models, because it's not just GitHub Copilot, but also the alternatives what we have in the market, are like context-aware Stack Overflow paste machines. And there's some truth in that. However, the keywords is the context-aware. So you can have the same results like copy-pasting your code from Stack Overflow, that's true, but all of the recommendations coming from Copilot or coming from other programming models are considering the environment where the code is sitting. And I'm going to show this in the demo, basically. So basically, what we can have here is that all of these things can be integrated into any popular IDEs. And these recommendations, what we have from Copilot, are not overwriting the IDE's normal recommendation, but coexisting with it. We have other alternatives like Tab9 or Amazon Code Whisperer. Basically, all of these tools are doing the same. And usually the performance is about the same as well. And I'm gonna try to make a quick demo case just to show you that how this tool is working. And for that, we have an imaginary situation where we have a front end. The front end is exporting some details of orders into a JSON file. That JSON file is stored in a storage account. And what we're going to focus now is a backend functionality. It's a very simple backend functionality, which is processing the JSON file and calculating the shipping distance and adding some additional information back to the JSON file. And this stuff is running in an Azure function, and it's connected to an Azure storage account with Event Grid. So whenever a new file is created on the storage account, we call an Azure function, and that Azure function will start processing the data. So what we have here is essentially an empty code. So if you use our Azure function, this is the base code for an Azure function. Whenever a new file is created on the connected storage account, then this function is called, and the new file's name basically is coming from the input stream, coming from the API, and you can work with that. Right now, if I make a new line, then Copilot will automatically start to give me a recommendation, or it will start to complete my line as I type in the line. So let's take a look on that and try to make a function to download a blob. So it's also, you can see that this recommendation, what we have here, is coming from the Copilot directory. So let's go with that. I'm going to take this recommendation, and there's a new line. Let me wait for the result. All right, this is the result what we're going to use. So we create a blob client, and then it will download it. Okay. But something is missing here. So it's just creating the blob client, but it's not creating the client service. So create the blob client service. All right. All right, now it's much better. So you can see that this recommendation was incomplete because it's created the client to download, but it does not create the client to connect to the blob service. So you need to be aware to accept these recommendations. You need to validate every time you get that. Now let me have some change here, and I don't want to use connection string. I want to use, for example, an SAS token to access that. So I'm going to delete this. And I got already recommendations, but let me see like that. Name equals to something. You see that the autocomplete is already trying to do this for me. So it's trying to refer to a storage account name and trying to refer a storage account key. Now I don't want to use the key. I rather want to use an SAS token. So it's giving me the recommendation immediately that, okay, I can use an SAS token. Now, I started to use two new modules here. One of them is the Azure Storage and the other one is the OS, which is not imported. So let's see if it can give me as a recommendation. It gives me automatically recommendation to import the OS. And as a new line, it gives me the recommendation to import the blob service client from the corresponding library. All right. So let's move on. What I want to do is I want to apply some naming convention here. So let's say that hun demo will be my prefix for any functions that I will create. And that's all. So just a simple naming convention to see. So I got this function now to download the blob. I want to have a new function to upload, let's say, this blob. And as you can see from the recommendation, it automatically give me the option to use the upload. And it also added the HAD prefix for the name of the function. Let's take a look at that. What is the recommendation for the actual code? And you can see it following the previous code's style. So it is using the account name as the environmental variable. It's using a SAS token as an environmental variable. And it's basically copying the previous style. Now let me remove this for a quick test. Let's say that for this download function, I want to add some basic error handling because I'm not happy that we are just trying and then if something goes wrong, then we get an error and nothing happens. So we will do this in a more formal way. Let's say that we try to download this, and if we have an exception, then we are doing something. We are doing with the logging error because as you can see, this logging library is already imported, so we will go with this. And we are not using this return at all. All right, I'm doing the same for the other code. Okay, but this error is not meaningful for me, so I just add something here. And it's also giving me a recommendation on what should be the error code, like error creating the blob service client, and then the actual error code. So it's automatically aware of the context of this new line, what I'm trying to add, and it's trying to populate it already with something. Let's say I want to have a logging here, a logging info that the execution is completed. And as you can see, it's also giving me a recommendation that the blob service client is created. So I'm fine with that. I just leave it as it is. Now, for a new line, you can see that it's automatically giving me the very same style, the very same logging information line here. And for the error, if I just delete it, the recommendation will adjust and it will come in the previous style. All right. So if I create yet again the upload function, then you can see that it will be automatically adjusted to match the style with the previous function. So I accept the recommendation, and then you can see that the very same try accept block is here, the same login info block is here. Everything what I previously added is adjusted. And I see that we're running out of the time, so I might not be able to complete this demo, but this is the wonders of demo, I guess. So let's just finalize quickly that I will download this blob and upload the blob. So I'm just going purely from the recommendations. Let's say download the blob. So the next line, which is recommended, is that we are actually using our functionality to download the blob. And I just want to upload the blob. And it's giving me the same. So we have this option to utilize autocomplete. So we just start typing something and it is giving us recommendations. That's the first option, how we can utilize large language models for programming. The other option, what we can use is that just to give a comment, like for example, this is a function to, I don't know, convert numbers into list of digits, okay, whatever. And then it will give you basically a recommendation how it should look like. So you can either start typing and it will try to give you a recommendation like an autocomplete based on the context of your code, or you can just create a comment describing what do you want to achieve in the next lines, and then giving you a recommendation for the next lines automatically. And it's working also backwards. So for example, if I check this line and I want Copilot to create a comment for me, it's giving me a recommendation that create a block client with a local file name and blah, blah, blah. So this is the three main use cases what you can use. You can generate comments automatically, you can generate code from comment, or you can generate code in an autocomplete form. And what you need to be aware that this will follow your naming convention for function names, for variable names, for output, for everything. It will follow your programming style, what you are defining, so you can open up existing codes and it will automatically adjust any new recommendations to your currently existing style. But of course, you need to be aware that not all of these lines are automatically working. So not all of these recommendations are right. You still need to understand how the code works. You still need to understand what do you want to achieve. And then you can utilize this properly. Okay, so I'm not able to complete now this exercise because we're running out of the time. Apologies for that. I'm quickly going back to the presentation and some final conclusions before we go for Q&A. So large language models will not take away your job, that's for sure. So we are still very far away from that situation when someone as a tech writer will lose the job or someone as a programmer will lose the job because of large language models. But they can definitely help you to make your work better, faster, at least faster for sure. The another conclusion is large language models still require knowledge on your given field. So it's not possible that you don't know JavaScript and you just start using large language models, you're asking for code, you copy pasting the code and it will work. That's not gonna happen. You still need to understand how the technology works and you still need to have knowledge on the given technological field. Another conclusion, you always need to validate the product of LLMs. So basically you should not trust blindly on the recommendations what you get from large language models. You need to test it, you need to proofread it. And of course, should not use large language models with sensitive corporate data, at least not ChatGPT for sure. If you're hosting it for yourself, a free web alternative, of course you can do that, but always be aware of what kind of information you are sharing and where. So I think we can go with the Q&A session. Okay, hallucinations worse or better when switching between GPT-4 and 3.5. I personally found that hallucinations are less frequent with GPT-4, and that's because GPT-4 can be forced into a context. So you can force GPT-4 saying that you are a Python developer, or you are a tech writer, or you are a physics practitioner, and then it will force into the context and it will not make up information based on any kind of other sources. So I believe that what I got as an experience is that GPT-4 is much better in that case, but again, 3.5 is constantly updated as well. So as I've shown, some of the demo cases for hallucinations, what I used before, they are not working anymore. So they are working on improving both of the models, but yet again, GPT-4 is larger, it's more complex, it is a bit better, I would say. Okay, for translating code, I tried and use this. All right, I'm not aware about it, but yeah, give it a shot. There's a lot of specific tools for specific tasks. GPT is not solely the only thing that can do code translation. Basically, there's a lot of other models out there. For example, for regex or for queries as well, you can have smaller models that can do the same with the same performance or even better. GPT is just a generic model, so you can use it for any kind of other activities as well. But thank you for sharing. The communication can be in any language, right? Yes, it can. However, you need to be aware that English is used for the training set. So if you are using, for example, Hungarian or any other language, you will get machine translated results back and forth. So if you're asking a question in Hungarian language, then it will get translated to English, the model will answer it, and it will get translated back to Hungarian. So you will see that the machine translation is not perfect. You can lose some meaning or you can have a worse result because of that. But definitely you can communicate in other languages as well. But you have the option that you will get a worse response, not the optimal. GitHub Copilot questions. Let's see. Can it validate the code to see if anything is missing? Looks like you still need to enter the code for it to complete. I noticed you still have at least start the line to get for it to suggest. Well, the thing is that if you have a context already, so if you have a few lines already, then every new line, so every time you press the enter and have a new line, Copilot will start to give you a recommendation. Sometimes it's meaningful, sometimes it's not, but you still need to somehow define that what do you want. You can either do it in an autocomplete way, as I mentioned, when you continue the code by pressing a new line, and then it gives you the recommendation, or you can do it to generate the code by your comments. So you write in the comment that what do you want to achieve, and then it auto-completes, or backwards. But yes, you need to start somewhere. You need to provide an input for the model. How much Copilot's usability depends on the actual programming language being used. It is efficient with less known used languages. I personally use with PowerShell. PowerShell is a not that common language, I would say, not comparable for big languages like JavaScript or whatsoever. And for that, it is still giving you good and meaningful recommendations. It depends really on the language. So if you try to use for COBOL, it is also working, but sometimes with more complicated code, it's not working that well, I would say. But basically, it really depends on how big is the coverage, because this is all about the numbers. If you have like 70% of the market, I'm just making up this number. If you have 70% of the market using JavaScript, then obviously most of the recommendations will come from that, and smaller languages will have smaller amount of codes available, what the model can learn, then obviously they will be not that good when it comes down to recommendations. How Llama 2 compares to GPT-4? I mean, it's only 7 billion compared to 2. Well, it is really hard to measure performance of large language models. So there are a lot of different metrics, like how the model is responding to sensitive questions, how the model can resolve mathematical equations, how the model can answer easy or complicated questions for the given field, or how it is prone to hallucinate. There's a lot of different metrics, and these metrics are often confusing. So if you see that, okay, one of them scored 60 out of 100 and the other scored 45 out of 100, you cannot just compare. You need to make a comparison based on your specific requirements, on what do you want to use the model for. If you want to use the model to solve mathematical equations, then you have basically your own metric, and then you can rank different models or which is the best for you. Llama 2, I tried it out already, and it is giving out very good recommendations. It's making up very good text. Of course, it is a little bit, how can I put that? So GPT has a lot of improvements based on context handling. So the maximum token size that GPT-4 can handle is way more than what Llama 2 can handle. And there's also not just about the model, it's about the other details of the landscape, which is not visible for us, like how they are handling these context things. So, of course, GPT-4 non-comparable to Llama 2, but I would absolutely compare it to 3.5. That's for sure. My view is that in the future we will not have bigger models. I mean, we are already approached a kind of a limit. So GPT-4 is not running on a single A100, it's running on a cluster of A100s probably. And that's why we run into capacity issues, which is preventing further bigger models. So I would say that in the future, we can expect smaller models, specifically fine-tuned for given task, which can, resolve smaller tasks better than these large generic models. So I hope we can see smaller models that, for example, can help you in specific fields or specific problems. So to wrap up, thank you very much for having me here. I hope at least I can give you some ideas or some insight on the large language models and how you can utilize that in your daily job, at least to give some ideas. Or maybe if you haven't learned anything, just have an insight that, okay, LLMs are not really for you, then this also be possible. But anyway, thank you very much for having me here, and I give back the word to Attila for final statements.
Now, let me thank you, Krisztián, for the insightful presentation. I really enjoyed, and I would like to thank for the attendance for joining today and being active with questions. Our channel name is Clouders Club. You can find this QR code in the right panel. And if you are a member of the Hungarian Azure user group, you will be notified our further events. So thank you again. Have a nice day. See you soon. Goodbye.